A man who spent 28 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit died in a cell in Holman Correctional on March 3, 2019. His name was Harland Whitfield. He was my uncle, and the attorney who put him there. The man my family trusted to protect every asset, every acre, every decision we ever made. He knew. He knew because his own son did it. I found a leather-bound ledger under the floorboards of my uncle's house. What was written inside? In Harland's own hand, unraveled 30 years of silence in a town that had very specific reasons for keeping quiet. I opened that ledger in front of the Dallas County District Attorney 8 weeks ago. The man who managed my uncle's trust, who sat at our Thanksgiving table, who drove my uncle to the police station the night he was arrested. He was sitting across the table. His mouth opened, and nothing came out. If you subscribe right now, you're going to hear what Harland wrote on page 41, the entry that made a state prosecutor drop her pen. You're going to hear what happened when they showed up at Emmett's son's office with a warrant on a Tuesday afternoon. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening. Now, let me tell you who I am and how I ended up sitting in a room with a man who buried my family. My name's Owen Whitfield. I'm 34. I work as a land surveyor out of Huntsville, Alabama. I measure property lines. I mark boundaries. I make sure the ground matches the paper. Until 7 weeks ago, I hadn't been back to Selma in over a decade. But when my uncle's estate finally cleared probate, after 4 years of delays that I now understand were deliberate, I drove down to sign papers and clean out a house I hadn't seen since I was a kid. I thought I was closing a chapter, sorting through boxes and old furniture. Maybe a weekend, maybe 2. I brought a tape measure, a box cutter, and a cooler with 2 sandwiches. The kind of trip where you expect dust and old dishes and a long drive home. What I found instead was a record of the most calculated betrayal I've ever seen. Written in pencil, in a dying man's handwriting, hidden behind a drawer panel with a piece of masking tape that said, "Read this." Let me take you back to August 1996, to a town where everybody knew the Whitfields, and everybody trusted the Gradens. And I mean everybody. Selma, in the summer of '96, was a place where you could leave your truck unlocked and nobody'd touch it. The heat sat on everything like a wet blanket. You'd step outside at 7 in the morning and your shirt was already sticking to your back. The trees along Broad Street hung low with that Alabama thickness, and the whole town moved at about half speed from June through September. My Uncle Harland was 41. He ran the family's timberland, about 300 acres west of town, out toward Orville. Big man, quiet, hands like catcher's mitts from working saws and hauling pine since he was 17. The kind of guy who'd fix your fence on a Saturday without you asking and never mention it. He'd show up at the property line with a post hole digger and a 6-pack of Coca-Cola, and by lunch the fence was straight and he was gone. My mother said Harland never raised his voice in his life. Not once. Not even when they put the cuffs on him. Corinne Voss was 24 years old. She was in her final semester of nursing at Wallace Community College, 3 months from graduation, already talking about applying to the ER program at Vaughn Regional. She worked weekends at the Walgreens on Broad Street and volunteered Tuesday evenings at the free clinic on Jeff Davis Avenue. Everyone knew Corinne. She sang in the choir at Brown Chapel, 2nd row, left side, every Sunday since she was 14. She used to bring soup to the older folks on Furnace Avenue in the winter, homemade, in mason jars with the lids taped shut so they wouldn't spill. Her sister Tamsin, who was 16 at the time, told me Corinne was the person you'd call at 2 a.m. when your car broke down. She'd show up in sweatpants and slippers with jumper cables and a flashlight, and she wouldn't even look tired. Corinne had plans, real ones. She wanted to work trauma nursing, said she liked the pace of it, the way you had to make decisions fast. She was going to be good at it. Everyone said so. On August 19, 1996, Corinne Voss was found dead in the gravel parking lot behind the old Cahaba Compress building on Water Avenue. She'd been strangled. The coroner put time of death between 10 p.m. and midnight. Her car was still running. The headlights were still on. A security light overhead buzzed and flickered and threw shadows across the gravel like something alive. She was 3 months from walking across a stage and getting the degree she'd worked 4 years for. 3 months. Harland was arrested 4 days later. The case against him came together fast, too fast, but I didn't think about that until much later. The lead detective, a guy who'd been with Selma PD less than 2 years, said Harland's truck was seen near the Cahaba Compress that night. A single witness put him there. That witness was a man named Roy Lumley, who worked maintenance at the compress and said he saw Harland's green Ford at 10:15 p.m. Now, at the time, a lot of people in town thought the investigation was sloppy. There was a co-worker at Walgreens, a man who'd been transferred from Tuscaloosa after some kind of complaint, who had asked Corinne out twice and been turned down. The police interviewed him once, confirmed he was home based on his own statement, and moved on. No verification, no follow-up. Here's the thing I need you to understand about Selma in '96. The Whitfields had land, but the Gradens had influence. Emmett Graydon had been the family attorney for 3 generations. He handled my grandmother Margaret's estate. He managed the timber contracts. He was the executor of my uncle's trust. And when Harland got arrested, it was Emmett who stood in our living room and told my grandmother that he'd make sure Harland got the best defense money could buy. He put his hand on her shoulder and said it. I've heard this from 3 different relatives. The same hand, the same promise. Emmett recommended the defense attorney. Emmett handled the legal bills. Emmett was at every hearing. And Emmett's son, Parrish, 26 years old that summer, had been seeing Corinne Voss for about 3 months before she died. It came up briefly during the investigation. Parrish gave a statement saying they'd gone on a few dates, but it wasn't serious. The police noted it and moved on. I didn't know how significant it was until I read what Harland wrote in that ledger. So I'm back in Selma, April of 2024. I hadn't been in Harland's house since I was maybe 12. My mom stopped going after the conviction. She said the town made her feel like a criminal by association, and I believe her. The house was exactly the way Harland left it before they transferred him to Holman. Nobody touched anything because the estate was still in probate. 4 years of probate for a house and a couple hundred acres of timberland. Does that sound normal to you? Because it's not. Probate in Alabama takes 6 to 8 months on a clean estate. 4 years means somebody was dragging it out. And I didn't know why yet, but my body knew something. The house felt wrong. Not haunted, nothing that dramatic, just heavy. 28 years of nobody walking those floors, nobody opening those windows, nobody living. I started with the kitchen, old dishes, canned goods from 2018. Then I moved to the study. Harland had a roll-top desk, heavy, old, the kind that weighs more than you do. I was pulling out the bottom drawer to see what was in there, and the panels stuck. I yanked harder, and the whole thing came loose. And I noticed the wood was different behind it. Lighter, newer, like someone had added a false panel at some point. Behind the false panel, there was a gap between the drawer frame and the floor. And sitting in that gap was a leather-bound book. Brown, roughly the size of a legal pad. No title on the cover, just a small piece of masking tape on the spine that said, "Read this." I remember my hands stopped moving. I was kneeling on the floor, and I could hear the house settling, and I was holding this book that had been sitting in the dark for years, maybe decades. I opened it. The first page said, in Harland's handwriting, I recognized it from the birthday cards he used to send. This is not a diary. This is a record. If you are reading this, I am dead, and someone needs to know what Emmett Graydon did. I sat on the floor for probably 20 minutes. I don't actually remember standing up. I need to stop for a second here, because there's a feeling I want to ask you about, and I think some of you already know it. Have you ever found something hidden in your own family? A letter, a document, a photograph that changed what you thought you knew about the people closest to you? Not in some movie way. Just that moment where you're holding something and the floor tilts and you realize the story you've been told your whole life
has a different ending than the one you believed? Drop that in the comments. I want to hear it. Because what Harland wrote in that ledger didn't just change my understanding of the case. It dismantled everything I thought I knew about the man who sat at our family table. What I'm about to take you through, the trial, the money, the 27 years of payments, it all starts with 9 days in a January courtroom. And it starts with Emmett sitting in the gallery, watching every single minute.
The trial of Harland Whitfield started on January 6, 1997, in a courtroom on the second floor of the Dallas County Courthouse. I was 6 years old. I don't remember the trial, obviously, but I remember the house that winter, the way it went quiet. My mother stopping mid-sentence and staring out the kitchen window. My grandmother's hands shaking when she poured coffee. The phone ringing and nobody wanting to pick it up. The trial lasted 9 days, and if you look at the transcripts, which I eventually got copies of, 3 cardboard boxes full of yellowed pages, the case was thin, circumstantial at best. But in 1997, Selma, thin was enough if the right people wanted it to stick. I spent those first evenings in Harland's house reading those transcripts by lamplight, sitting in Harland's chair, reading about the worst thing that ever happened to him, in the room where he used to sit and read the newspaper. Roy Lumley, that was the state's star witness, maintenance worker at the Cahaba Compress. He testified that he saw Harland's green Ford F-150 in the lot at 10:15 p.m. the night Corinne was killed. He said he recognized the truck because Harland had done timber work on the Compress property the previous month, and Lumley had seen the truck every day. That's it. That was the physical placement. 1 witness, 1 truck. The prosecution added a timeline showing Harland couldn't account for his whereabouts between 9 p.m. and midnight. Harland's defense, the attorney Emmett recommended, tried to establish that Harland was home alone, which is the worst alibi in the world. Home alone means no one can confirm or deny. Now, when I was reading those transcripts, I was angry at the detective. This was a lazy investigator who grabbed the easiest suspect and ran with it. Didn't follow up on the Walgreens co-worker, didn't subpoena phone records. I wrote in the margin of the transcript, "Detective's fault." I underlined it twice. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. Here's where Emmett enters the courtroom picture. Emmett Graydon wasn't the prosecutor. He wasn't the defense attorney. He was, on paper, just the family's estate attorney. But he was in that courtroom every single day, sitting in the gallery, right behind the defense table. Navy suit, gold tie clip, legal pad open on his knee, taking notes. I need to tell you something before I get to what Emmett said. There's a Thanksgiving I think about. I must have been 4 or 5. Harland came over with a pecan pie he'd bought from a woman at his church. He sat at the end of the table next to my grandmother, and they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. He carved the turkey because my grandfather had been gone 10 years, and Harland had taken over that job without anyone asking. After dinner, he took me out to the backyard and showed me how to identify pine trees by their needles. Loblolly versus longleaf. He held a branch down to my height and let me feel the difference. His hands smelled like pine sap and wood smoke. That's who Harland was to me. The man who smelled like trees and cut the turkey. And while I'm reading these trial transcripts 27 years later, I'm reading about how Emmett, who was at that same Thanksgiving, eating that same turkey, took my grandmother aside after the second day of trial and said something I didn't learn about until I read Harland's ledger. He said, "Margaret, I want you to understand something. Your son is not well. He has issues none of us knew about. The best thing we can do for this family is let the process work and protect the estate." Let the process work. Protect the estate. That was Emmett's play. Plant the idea that Harland was broken. Not that Harland was framed. Not that the evidence was thin. That Harland was sick, and the family needed to focus on preserving the land, the timber contracts, the trust. And my grandmother listened, because Emmett had been the family's lawyer for 40 years, because she trusted him the way you trust a doctor who's been treating you since you were born. She trusted him with her son's life. The jury convicted Harland on January 15, 1997. Second-degree murder. He was sentenced
to 30 years. He served 28 before he died of a heart attack in his cell. 28 years for a murder he didn't commit, and the man who made sure he stayed there was eating Thanksgiving dinner at our table. I sat in Harlan's study that night and closed the transcript binder, and I remember thinking, I'd been blaming the wrong person. It wasn't the detective. The detective was just a tool, the hand that pointed him at Harlan, the hand that kept the investigation narrow, the hand that recommended the defense attorney who barely tried. That hand belonged to someone I hadn't suspected yet. But the ledger was sitting on the desk next to me, and I was about to read page 12.
Back to 2024. I took the ledger out to my truck the next morning. I couldn't stay in that house with it. His coffee mug was still on the counter. His jacket was still on the hook by the door. I needed air. So I sat in my truck in the driveway with the windows cracked and the April morning warming up the cab. And I started reading from page 12. What I was reading was a financial record, not a confession, not a letter. The handwriting changed over the years. Earlier entries were tight and precise, later ones looser, the pencil pressing harder. Harlan had been tracking the Whitfield family trust accounts from inside prison. He had dates, he had amounts, and he had names. Starting in February 1997, 1 month after his conviction, there was a series of payments from the Whitfield Trust to a company called Riverbend Property Services. 4 payments a year, every March, June, September, and December, $1,500 each time. Riverbend Property Services. I'd never heard of it. But Harlan had written next to the first entry, "This company does not exist. Check Roy Lumley." Roy Lumley, the one witness. I sat there in my truck for a long time. The sun was climbing and the cab was getting hot and my hands were sweating against the leather cover. One of those spring mornings in Alabama where the mockingbirds go crazy in the crepe myrtles, and the air smells like cut grass and red clay. And I had this ledger in my lap telling me that the star witness against my uncle was being paid, quarterly like clockwork, from my family's own trust fund, the trust Emmett Graydon controlled. I put the ledger down on the passenger seat, and for maybe 5 minutes I felt something like hope. Financial records, payment dates, the witness's name right there in black and white. This is enough to reopen the case. Then I turned to the next page, and Harlan had written in smaller handwriting, a note dated January 2024. Payments to Riverbend stopped, e.g. moving accounts. If the payments stop, it means he's cleaning up. The payments had stopped in March 2024, 1 month before I came down to Selma. Emmett was already covering his tracks, which meant every day I sat here reading was a day he had to destroy records, move money, get to Lumley, close accounts. I might already be too late. Who pays a witness for 27 years? And the whole time, my uncle is in a cell at Holman tracking every payment, building this ledger page by page, knowing exactly what's happening to his own money, and unable to do a single thing about it. That's when I called Tamsin Voss, Corinne's sister. She was 44 now, living in Montgomery, working as a paralegal. I'd never met her before. I was 6 when Corinne died. But her name was in Harlan's ledger. On page 31, Harlan had written, "If you need someone who still cares about Corinne, find Tamsin Voss." She wrote to me 9 times. She never believed I did it. I waited about a week before I made that call. I needed time to finish reading. I needed to be sure I wasn't chasing something that would collapse the moment someone with a law degree looked at it. But the handwriting was too careful. The dates were too consistent. The detail was too specific. A man inventing a story doesn't track quarterly payments for 20 years with check numbers. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. You've got a ledger that says the witness was paid. You've got a dead uncle. You've got a family attorney who's still practicing in town, still managing estates, still sitting in that same office on Lauderdale Street. And you've just found out he might be destroying evidence right now. Do you drive back to Huntsville and hand it to a lawyer and wait 6 months for a return call? Or do you stay in this town where you don't know anyone and start pulling at a thread that could get very dangerous very fast? What would you risk? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear what you'd do, because the next person I met changed everything, and I made a choice that week I still think about every night.
What I did was stay, and the first thing I did was drive to Montgomery to meet a woman who'd been waiting 28 years for someone to believe her. I need to go back to 1996 again, to the night Corinne died, because what came out later, what Tamsin told me and what I eventually confirmed, is that there were things about that night the police never investigated. Parrish Graydon, Emmett's son, 26 years old in the summer of '96. He'd been seeing Corinne for about 3 months. Tamsin told me Corinne had been talking about ending things. She said Parrish had a temper. Not the kind you'd see at a barbecue, the kind that came out behind closed doors. The kind that showed up in the way he gripped her arm at the church picnic, and everybody pretended not to see it.
Corinne had shown Tamsin a bruise on her arm in late July, about 3 weeks before she died. Said she'd bumped into a cabinet. Tamsin didn't believe her. She told me she looked at that bruise and felt something cold settle in her stomach. But she didn't push because Corinne was the older sister. You don't push the older sister. You wait for her to tell you. On August 19th, the night Corinne was killed, Tamsin was at a friend's house in Cahaba. She called Corinne around 8 p.m. Corinne said she was heading out to meet Parrish. "He wants to talk about things," she said. Her voice was normal. A little tired, maybe, but normal. That was the last time Tamsin heard her sister's voice. Now here's the thing. When the police investigated Corinne's murder, they interviewed Parrish Graydon once, for 40 minutes. And in that interview, which I eventually obtained a copy of, Parrish said he was at his father's lake house in Prattville that night. Emmett confirmed the alibi, called the station himself, said Parrish arrived at 7 p.m. and didn't leave until the next morning. Nobody checked. Nobody drove to Prattville to verify. Nobody talked to the neighbors at the lake. Nobody pulled phone records. The interview transcript shows that Parrish was asked 3 times about his relationship with Corinne, and all 3 times he gave the same answer, almost word for word. "We went on a few dates. It wasn't serious," like a line he'd rehearsed, like someone had told him exactly what to say and made him repeat it until it sounded natural. And you know why nobody pushed? Because Emmett Graydon was on the Selma City Council. He was the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. He golfed with the district attorney on Saturdays. When Emmett Graydon said his son was at the lake house, that was the end of the conversation. One of the neighbors at the lake house, a retired postal worker whose name I won't use, told me in 2024 that she never saw Parrish's car that night. She'd been sitting on her porch until midnight watching for a stray dog that had been getting into her garden. No car came or went from the Graydon property all evening. No lights on in the house, no TV glow through the windows. The property looked empty. But that testimony never existed in 1997, because nobody asked her. Emmett made sure the investigation went in one direction. Harland Whitfield, the quiet timber man with no alibi. The man whose own trust fund would be managed by Emmett once he was gone. You know what's strange? After I learned all of this, after the weight of it should have crushed me, I drove past the Walgreens on Broad Street, and they had a sale sign for cough drops in the window. 2 for 1, and I caught myself reading it. Just reading a sale sign like it was any other Tuesday. Like the whole town hadn't been living inside a lie for 30 years, while people bought cough drops and went to work and complained about the heat. That's the thing about a cover-up in a small town. It doesn't require everyone to be in on it. It just requires everyone to be comfortable. The day I met Tamsin Voss was April 11th, 2024. She lived on the second floor of a walk-up on a quiet street in Montgomery. I stood at her door for about 10 seconds before I knocked. I'd rehearsed things in the car, who I was, why I was there, what I'd found. But standing there, none of it sounded right. How do you introduce yourself to the sister of a woman your family supposedly killed? She opened the door, and the first thing she said was, "You look like him." She meant Harland. I've been told that before. Tamsin was 44, lean, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a look in her eyes that I can only describe as permanently braced. Like she'd been expecting bad news for so long, her face had set that way. Her apartment smelled like coffee and old paper. "Come in," she said. "I've been waiting for this conversation for a long time. I didn't know who was going to show up, but I knew someone would." I sat down at her kitchen table. She poured me coffee in a mug that had a chip on the rim.
For a few minutes, we just looked at each other. "You said on the phone you found something," she said. "I found a ledger in Harlan's house, hidden under the study floor." "What kind of ledger?" "Financial records, trust payments, and a written account of—" I stopped because my throat closed up, and I realized I was about to say the words out loud for the first time to someone who wasn't me. Of what Emmett Graydon did. What he's been doing for 27 years. Tamsin set her coffee down. She didn't say anything for probably 30 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "Does it mention Parrish?" "Yes." She got up from the table, walked to the hallway. I heard a closet door open. She came back carrying a box, the kind you'd keep shoes in, and set it on the table between us. Inside were 9 letters she'd written to Harlan while he was in prison, and 7 letters he'd written back. She also had her own notes, dates, names, things she'd been collecting for years. Not because she was building a case, but because she couldn't let go. "I want to show you something," she said. She spread the letters out, then pulled a folded piece of yellow legal paper from the bottom. "I made a timeline. Every date I could verify. Every conversation I remembered." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "You're a surveyor, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "So you know how to read records? Property filings, legal descriptions?" "That's what I do." "Good." She pushed the legal paper toward me. "Because I've got 28 years of notes and no one to help me read the county records. I went to the courthouse 3 times. The filing system is a mess and I don't know what I'm looking for. But you'd know where to look." She was right. 10 years of pulling property records in county courthouses across North Alabama. I know how filing systems work, how to trace land ownership, cross-reference deed records with trust filings. Right then, precision was exactly what we needed. Tamsin had always believed Parrish killed Corrine. She'd told the police in 1996. They took her statement and nothing happened. She went to the DA's office twice in 1998 after the conviction. Both times a secretary told her the case was closed. The third time she tried, in 2001, she got a phone call from Emmett Graydon directly. And this is the part that makes my skin crawl. She didn't get this call at home. She got it at work, the law office where she clerked in Montgomery. Emmett called the main line, asked for her by name. Half the office could hear Tamsin's side of the conversation. He said, "Tamsin, I understand your grief, but Harlan Whitfield was convicted by a jury of his peers. Your inquiries are creating problems for people who have moved on. If you continue making these calls, I'll have to involve my attorneys. And I say that not as a threat, but as a professional courtesy." Professional courtesy. He called her at her workplace to warn her off, in front of her colleagues, the man whose son strangled her sister. I showed Tamsin the ledger. I watched her read the entries about Riverbend Property Services. She read page after page, running her finger along the lines, her lips moving slightly. Then she stopped on a page, and her hands went flat on the table, and she looked at the wall. Not at me, at the wall. And then she laughed. One short, hard sound, like something breaking. 27 years, she said. I've been banging on doors for 27 years, and the proof was sitting in a dead man's floorboards. She picked up her coffee mug and put it back down without drinking. Sorry, I'm not laughing. I don't know what the appropriate reaction is to something like this. $1,500, she said, looking back at the ledger. Every quarter. For how long? 27 years, I said. The payments stopped in March 2024, 1 month before I came down. Why did they stop? Because probate was finally clearing. Because I was coming to take possession of the estate. And because Emmett couldn't make payments from a trust he no longer controlled. That was the moment. I could see it land. 27 years of quarterly payments to a fake company, traced to the one witness who put Harlan in prison. And the payments came from Harlan's own family trust, the trust Emmett controlled as executor. Harlan was paying for his own conviction, with his own money, and he knew it. That's why he kept the ledger. We sat there for a while. Tamsin made more coffee. She told me about a photograph she kept on her nightstand. Corinne at her high school graduation, cap tilted sideways, grinning at the camera. She said she talks to it sometimes. Not in a crazy way, she said. Just, good morning, that kind of thing. She poured the coffee, and the steam rose between us, and for a second neither of us said anything, and it was the warmest silence I'd felt since I came to Alabama. Then Tamsin pulled out a letter from the box, one of Harlan's. She started reading it out loud, matter of fact, like she was reading a grocery list. Then she hit a line, something about Harlan saying he could still hear Corinne singing at Brown Chapel, and her voice cracked like a glass hitting a tile floor. No warning, no build-up. 1 second she was steady, the next her hands were shaking and her voice was gone, and she was gripping that letter hard enough to crease it. I didn't say anything. What do you say? She put the letter down and wiped her eyes and said, "Okay, what's next?" Hit subscribe right now, because the next 48 hours are when everything either comes together or falls apart, and you need to be here for what Owen and Tamsin found at the Dallas County Courthouse. Tamsin and I went back to Selma together the next day. We had the ledger, we had Tamsin's letters and timeline, and we had the name of the neighbor at the lake house who never saw Parrish's car. I want to be straight with you about something. At this point, I still hadn't talked to a lawyer. I hadn't gone to the police. I was doing this on my own, with a woman I'd met 24 hours ago, and the only reason I trusted her was because Harlan's told me to. In a book he wrote in prison, probably at night, probably with a pencil he had to share with 3 other guys on his block, I was betting everything on a dead man's handwriting. But Tamsin's 28 years of notes made the difference. She'd already done the legwork that would have taken me months alone. When I matched her timeline against Harlan's ledger entries, the gaps filled in. She knew the people. I knew the records. Together, we moved faster than either of us could have alone. The morning we drove back, I went to the Dallas County Courthouse. The filing cabinets in the property records office were the heavy green metal kind, and the drawer I needed stuck when I pulled it. I pulled the property records for Riverbend Property Services, cross-referencing the incorporation number against the county filing index the way I'd done 1,000 times on survey jobs. Registered in 1997 to a P.O. box in Demopolis, about 45 miles west. The registered agent? A law firm in Tuscaloosa that had dissolved in 2003. But the original filing, the Articles of Organization, had a signature on page 3. Emmett Graydon. He'd created the shell company himself. He signs the paperwork. He set up the payment structure from the Whitfield Trust. He built the machine that paid off Roy Lumley for 27 years using my family's money. I stood at that filing cabinet and thought about my job. In surveying, you sometimes find a boundary line that's been wrong for decades. Everyone's been building on it, living their lives on it, and none of it was real. That's what Emmett built. A boundary that everyone accepted because nobody checked the survey. Some things hold up when you measure them. Some things collapse the moment you do. I need to go back to something that happened the next morning. When I pulled those records at the courthouse, the clerk recognized my name. She looked at me over her bifocals and said, "Oh, Whitfield, you should know. Mr. Graydon has been in here twice this week, pulled files on the same property." He knew I was looking. He was already trying to clean up. My hands went cold. If Emmett knew I was pulling records, he could call Lumley. He could destroy the Riverbend paperwork at his office. He could move whatever was left in the trust accounts. I figured I had maybe 48 hours before this whole thing went up in smoke. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself when you answer it. Right now, I was standing in a courthouse in a town where the most powerful attorney in Dallas County had just been pulling the same files I was looking at. Tamsin was in the car. The ledger was in my bag, and a clock was running that neither of us could see. Would you have walked into that man's office and confronted him, knowing he'd have time to call a lawyer and burn every piece of paper in his filing cabinet? Or would you have gone straight to a prosecutor outside the county, outside Emmett's influence, outside his golf games and his dinner invitations, and prayed they'd move fast enough? Think about that, because I picked up the phone and called the state attorney general's office in Montgomery. And what happens next moved faster than I thought possible. 18 days later, May 6th, 2024. I'm sitting in a conference room at the Dallas County Courthouse with a state prosecutor from the Attorney General's office. Tamsin is next to me. 2 investigators from the AG's office are at the end of the table. And across from us, with his own lawyer beside him, is Emmett Graydon. He looked smaller than I remembered. Emmett was 73. He still wore the same kind of suits, navy, pinstripe, gold tie clip. His hair was thinner. His hands were steady on the table, but his jaw was doing this small grinding motion, like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. There was a water pitcher in the center of the table that nobody touched. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Before any of this started, there were a few seconds of quiet. The prosecutor was arranging documents. Tamsin had her hands folded in her lap, and I looked at Emmett's face and tried to see the man who used to sit at our kitchen table. He looked back at me, and his eyes were flat. Not angry, not worried, just empty, like windows with the shades down.
The prosecutor laid it out. She had subpoenaed the Whitfield Trust records. She had the Riverbend Property Services Incorporation documents. She had the quarterly payment records, all 108 of them, totaling over $162,000. She paused. Emmett's lawyer leaned forward and said, "My client is willing to discuss." "I'm not finished," the prosecutor said. She had a sworn affidavit from Roy Lumley, who had been contacted 2 weeks earlier and, when presented with the payment records, told investigators everything. Emmett's lawyer interrupted again. "I'd like to note an objection to the manner in which," and the prosecutor held up her hand without looking at him and said, "You can note that for the record. I'm continuing." Roy Lumley's statement detailed every interaction with Emmett from August 1996 through March 2024. He said Emmett approached him in August 1996, 3 days after Corinne's murder, and offered him $6,000 a year to testify that he saw Harlan's truck at the compress. He said Emmett told him, "Nobody's going to look too hard at this one. You just need to say what I tell you to say, and I'll take care of you." I was gripping the edge of my chair. I looked at Tamsin. She was sitting very still, her jaw tight, staring at Emmett. The prosecutor placed the ledger on the table. She opened it to page 41. The entry Harlan had written in 2011, 14 years into his sentence. It read, "March 2011, Riverbend payment confirmed through commissary account review. EG thinks I don't know about these, but I've been tracking since 2003 when a guard at Holman showed me the trust statement by accident. Emmett is paying my accuser with my family's money. His son killed Corinne Voss. I know because Parrish told me. He told me the night they arrested me. He said, 'Uncle Harland, I didn't mean to. She was going to leave and I grabbed her and I didn't mean to.' And then his father walked in. And after that, I never saw Parrish again. Emmett drove me to the station that night. In the car, he said, 'Harland, you have 2 choices. You cooperate with this investigation, or I liquidate the trust and your mother loses everything.' I chose wrong." The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Dead quiet. The fluorescent light buzzed. Someone's pen rolled off the table and hit the floor, and nobody picked it up. Emmett's lawyer started to speak again, and this time Emmett himself held up his hand. Just a small gesture, palm out, like he was stopping traffic. His lawyer sat back. For a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, it looked like Emmett was going to respond. He opened his mouth. He adjusted his tie clip. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something, and I thought, he's going to talk his way out of this. He's had 40 years of practice talking his way through rooms like this. He's going to find a seam. Then the prosecutor said, "Mr. Graydon, before you speak, I should inform you that Parrish Graydon was taken into custody this morning at his office in Birmingham. He's been charged with the murder of Corinne Voss." And that's when Emmett's face changed. I've never seen someone's face just empty. It didn't crumble. It didn't twist. It just went blank. Every expression he'd ever practiced left at once. And his hands, those steady hands, started to shake. "You don't understand," he said. His voice was thin. "You don't understand what I was protecting." "Your son," I said. "My family. Harland was your family too. He called you uncle." He didn't answer that. He looked at the table, and for half a second, I saw something behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. More like exhaustion.
The kind of tired you get from carrying something so long you forgot you were carrying it. Then it was gone, and the mask came back. The mask of a man who knows the mask doesn't work anymore, but can't take it off. The prosecutor asked Emmett if he had anything to say. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something. Emmett straightened in his chair. He looked directly at the prosecutor, not at me, not at Tamsin. He said, "I'd like this on record. Harland Whitfield was not a well man. He had personal issues that made him a believable suspect. I did what any attorney would do to protect a client's interests. 28 years. That's what he had to say. The same play, the same script. Harland was the problem. Harland was sick. Protect the family. He was still running the same con in the same room where it all started. I looked at Tamsin. She was crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face, quiet and steady. And she said very softly, her name was Corinne. That was the moment. Not the ledger, not the payment records, not the prosecutor's statement. A woman saying her dead sister's name in a room full of people who'd spent 30 years pretending she didn't matter.
Emmett's lawyer started packing his briefcase. The prosecutor stood. The investigators gathered papers. And I sat there. I sat there until the room was almost empty. And then I got up and walked out of the building into the parking lot. And I got in my truck, and I couldn't turn the key. My hands were shaking, not a little. The kind of shaking where you can see your knuckles jumping. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and I broke. Everything I'd been holding for 6 weeks came out in that truck. The ledger and the letters and the floorboards and the masking tape and Harlan's handwriting and Corinne's choir and my grandmother's face when she trusted the wrong man. All of it, right there in a courthouse parking lot with the windows up and the sun beating on the hood. Tamsin came out a few minutes later. She didn't knock on the window. She didn't try to talk to me. She just stood next to the truck, leaning against the driver's door with her back to me like she was standing guard, like she was making sure nobody saw. We stood there, me inside, her outside, for maybe 10 minutes. Then she said through the glass, "You did it. Harland asked, and you did it." The man wrote a ledger in a prison cell and hid it under his own floor and waited for someone to care enough to find it. He waited 28 years. He died waiting, but someone found it. Things moved fast after that. 3 days after the meeting, a grand jury in Dallas County indicted Emmett Graydon on charges of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, subornation of perjury, and misappropriation of fiduciary funds. Bail was set at $200,000. He posted it the same afternoon. I heard he drove home and didn't come out of his house for 4 days. Parrish Graydon was held without bail in Jefferson County on a first-degree murder charge. His arraignment was May 14th. He pleaded not guilty. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss based on statute of limitations. The judge denied it within a week. There is no statute of limitations on murder in Alabama. Roy Lumley cooperated fully. 27 years of quarterly payments, wire transfer confirmations, and phone calls from Emmett reminding him to stay the course. Lumley said he hadn't slept through a full night in 20 years. He said every time he drove past the Cahaba Compress, he took the long way around so he wouldn't have to see the parking lot. I don't know what to do with that. Part of me understands and part of me doesn't. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals issued a posthumous exoneration for Harland Whitfield on June 22, 2024. I was standing in a hallway outside a courtroom in Montgomery with Tamsin and a paralegal from the AG's office. The judge read the order. It took less than 3 minutes. 28 years in prison. 3 minutes to undo it on paper. Tamsin held my hand while the judge read. Neither of us said a word. The Selma Times-Journal ran a front-page story. The headline was about the Graydon family, not about Harland, not about Corinne, about the Graydons. I threw that newspaper away. Emmett's law license was suspended within 2 weeks. The Alabama State Bar opened a formal investigation. 3 former clients filed civil suits by the end of June. His office on Lauderdale Street, the one with the brass nameplate and the leather chairs, closed in July. The brass nameplate was gone by August, just 2 screw holes in the brick. And here's the thing nobody expected.
After the story broke, 4 other families came forward with questions about how Emmett had managed their estates, all with trust structures he controlled, all with payment irregularities they'd noticed but never questioned because who questions their family attorney? Who looks at the man who's been managing your money for 30 years and says, "Show me the receipts"? Nobody did, until someone pulled up the floorboards. It's been about 7 months now. I didn't go back to Huntsville right away. I stayed in Selma for most of the summer, working through the estate with a trust recovery attorney from Mobile. She went through the Whitfield Trust line by line. What she found was worse than I expected. Emmett had been skimming management fees for years on top of the Riverbend payments, but that's another story. I spent time at Harlan's house, fixing things, not because they needed fixing right away, but because I needed to do something with my hands. The porch railing was rotted through. I pulled every board and replaced them with treated pine. The water heater had been dead since 2019. I spent a Saturday in the crawl space connecting the new lines. I replaced the boards in the study floor, the same boards I'd pulled up to find the ledger. Cut them myself, sanded them by hand, fit them flush. The new boards were lighter than the old ones. They'll darken over time. And one afternoon, while I was sanding the window frames in the kitchen, I found something else. Initials carved into the underside of the sill. HW plus MW. Harland and my grandmother Margaret. He must have done that as a kid, maybe 10, 12 years old. Just a boy, carving his name into his mother's kitchen. The letters were rough, done with a pocket knife probably, and the M had an extra line like he'd started wrong and corrected it. I ran my thumb across them. I sat with that for a good long time. Tamsin and I talk every couple of weeks now. She's started the process of applying for a victim's memorial through the state. She wants Corinne's name on a plaque at Brown Chapel, where Corinne used to sing. We drove down to the church together in August. The pastor met us at the door. He'd been there 40 years, and he remembered Corinne. He said, "Second row, left side, every Sunday." Tamsin just nodded. We walked inside and stood in the spot where the plaque would go. And Tamsin reached up and touched the wall, and she said, "Here, right here, so the choir can see it." The church board approved it in September. Some things take 28 years, but they get done. Last thing. 3 weeks ago, I drove past the courthouse in Selma on my way to check the timber line, and I saw Emmett Graydon. He was sitting on a bench outside the building. Not the kind of sitting where you're waiting for someone. The kind where you've been sitting there a while and you don't have anywhere else to go. He was wearing a gray jacket, no tie. His briefcase was next to him, the same leather one he used to carry into our living room when I was a kid. But it looked empty, like it was holding nothing. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and looked away. I don't know. I kept driving. And as I turned onto Broad Street, I thought about Harland sitting in a cell at Holman for 28 years, waiting for someone to find that ledger, waiting for someone to care enough to pull up the floorboards. I thought about Corinne Voss, who was 24 years old and studying nursing and bringing soup to people on Furnace Avenue, and who never got to graduate, who never got to work the ER the way she wanted, who never got to grow old. And I thought about that bench, because here's the thing. A man who spent his whole career sitting behind a desk telling other people's families what to do with their lives, their land, their money, their grief, that man is now sitting on a public bench outside the courthouse with an empty briefcase and nowhere to be, and nobody stopped to say hello. I watched. Nobody even looked at him. I want to thank you for listening to this. All of it. I know it's not an easy story. I know there are parts of it that are hard to sit with, but you stayed, and that matters more than I can say. Let me ask you something, and I mean this. Who's the person in your life that you trust without question? The one you'd hand your family's future to without thinking twice? Think about that name, and then ask yourself, would you know if they were lying? If you felt something for Harland or for Corinne, if this story made you stop and think about the people you trust, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. These stories reach people because of you. I'll read every comment.
I mean that. If there are more stories like this one on your screen right now, give one a chance. You might be surprised what you find. Corinne Voss deserved to graduate. Harland Whitfield deserved to die in his own house, with his own name cleared, looking out his own kitchen window. They didn't get that. But the truth did. It's late, but it's here.